Hi, this is Caroline from The Happy Sensitive. I'm a coach for highly sensitive people and empaths. And today I want to talk about, is it a problem if you care too much? Because there are a lot of people who say that, right? They say you shouldn't care so much, it's not good for you, it's not healthy. Some people will tend to argue that you need to be more narcissistic. That's another big misunderstanding, but we can talk about that another day. What I want to talk about here is just that, like, if you're very compassionate, if you care a lot, is that a problem? Should you tone it down? I don't think it's a problem, but you need something to balance it. And a lot of people with very caring, generous hearts can be naive. And I grew up very naive, in some ways, experienced a lot of things, and in some ways grew up sheltered. And so there were ways that I was very naive, and I knew that. And I knew, like, I don't really know how this works. I don't really know what's going on here. I don't really know how this is in reality. And so I sought out opportunities to become more worldly, in a sense, become more knowledgeable, like how do things really work? And especially around people, like what are people really like? If you care a lot and you cannot afford to believe that everyone out there is doing their best and everyone just wants the best for everyone and everybody loves everyone, everybody cares. Like that, you cannot have that belief because you will get slaughtered out there. You need to get real about, there are people with personality disorders. There are people who will try to swindle you. There are people who have a different agenda. Basically, what you need to understand is that while you might be focused on love a lot and you think that that's the most important thing and you think that everybody else is or should be focused on love as well, there are a lot of people who are actually focused on power. That's the only thing they care about. They don't give a damn about love or caring or supporting, and they see that as weakness. And this is really, really important to understand. When you come from your heart and you emphasize caring and loving and supporting other people, you have to understand that there are people who live in a opposite way to that and who are going to challenge you, are going to use your generosity against you. So it doesn't mean that you have to become less generous or less caring, but you have to become discerning. You have to decide, who do I give this to? You have to start watching for what is really going on here in this social dynamic and who am I really dealing with? Because if you just make assumptions, if you just make kind assumptions, you will get suckered by the wrong people. The wrong people will take advantage of you. They'll spot you from a mile off because you don't see them. You don't see like the bad folks out there because you just assume they don't exist, right? You're like, oh, you just hurt people. So they're just hurting, and if just get enough love, then they'll be okay. Like, no, that's not, that's not how it works. People who are really dark and lost reject love, reject kindness. They don't want any of that. They're just looking for a way to boost their power. And you have to understand, you have to know that. So having a big caring heart, like, please keep it, but you have to protect your heart with being savvy, being knowledgeable. And if you know you're quite naive, you have to work on that. You have to get real about what some people are really capable of. One of the great ways to do that is documentaries. There are a lot of great documentaries now on all kinds of swindlers and, how they set things up and how they fooled people. There are documentaries on the mob and all that kind of stuff. And those are good to watch to get a sense, to really get a felt, visceral sense of like, oh, these people exist and this is how they think and this is what they do and this is what they're after. Until you start to really, really have that sink in and be a reality, like that is actually out there. I mean, if it's sunken in, then, you've lost that naivete and it protects you because you realize not everyone there is somebody else, not everybody out there is someone I can trust, right? That doesn't mean you have to walk around being fearful or terrified all the time. It just means you got to be aware not everybody's there to help you and support you. And you shouldn't try to help and support everyone out there because some people will take advantage and hurt you really badly. So if you've been hurt really badly and you think, oh, I just got to close my heart and never care again, that is not the solution. The solution is becoming discerning. Where and how can you be caring and loving and generous safely? And where and how do you need to be aware because something might not be right? And part of that is also just taking your time to get to know people, right? Don't jump to conclusions. Like, take your time, observe, how does somebody behave? What are they doing? how do they deal with responsibility? How do they deal with other people's stuff? Do they take responsibility, or do they make excuses? All this kind of thing. But in order to place those observations well, you need to have a framework of the world in which there is actually space for malicious people. There is actually space for messed up people. There is space for dark people who are not the kind of people that you want to get closer to. They're not the kind of people you want to heal. They're not the kind of people you want to help. They're just the kind of people you want to avoid. All right, and once that's got sunken into your system, you'll find that your heart's going to have a much better time dealing with the world. Now, for very many caring people, narcissists are the wake-up call on this front. Narcissists are the people who, whether you want to or not, wake you up to the reality that there are actually people out there who will just take advantage and they'll lie to your face, and they're not trying to build a healthy, happy relationship together. They're just trying to use you, keep you small, make themselves feel better, and everything becomes a competition. And, if you've been hurt by narcissistic people, you know that it can really, really, really just dampen your enthusiasm, and it can really hurt your heart in ways that you didn't really expect, and it can really shake your worldview, right? But in a way, it's meant to shake your worldview, because if you're naive about this kind of stuff, chances are you grew up with more of it than you realized, and your way of coping was kind of like tuning it out and pretending it wasn't there, because it's hard to see malicious people, it's hard to see dark people and actually see them for who they are. And so especially when you're small, we tend to kind of make up stories and make up feel better stories for ourselves. If I just think this and I think about it this way, and if I just do this, everything will be fine. And so we carry those stories into our adulthood. And if you have these stories on the inside, then all these kind of, let's say just bad people, they go under the radar because you don't see them, because you've learned to kind of tune them out, and you've learned to not see them on purpose. And this can really, really bite you. This can really get you in trouble. So it's important for people with a big heart to wake up, to realize not everybody's interested in love, not everybody's interested in caring, not everybody wants to get along, happily and peacefully and work together. There are people with a very different agenda, and we have to kind of incorporate that knowing into our worldview so we can see it, and so that when we can see it, we can also just deal with it. And not pretend that it's not there, not pretend that we can just make it better by just loving really hard, not pretend we can make it better by just being pleasing and supportive, because that all just makes it worse. So what is really hard about dealing with, narcissistic people is that you have to do kind of the opposite of what you want to do, right? You want to kind of just like open your arms and hug them, but that's actually not safe to do. You're just going to get pulled into a really unhealthy dynamic if you kind of follow that impulse. You think that if you just open up more, they'll become more open and more accommodating, and you'll connect better. But actually, when you open yourself up more, you become more exposed, and you become more endangered in a sense, because you're sharing more of what makes you vulnerable, which they will use against you. So in dealing with narcissists, we have to learn all the things that we rather wouldn't do, all the things that we wish weren't necessary in this world. And it doesn't mean that you have to be like that all the time, but you have to be able to do that sometime. Because if you refuse, if you're like, I'm always keeping my heart open, I'm always going to love everyone, then you're going to get hit on the head over and over and over in situations with narcissistic people, where they just abuse you in one way or the other. They just take advantage of the fact that you're kind of stuck in this love mode, and they're like, ha, sucker, I can do whatever I want because this person's just going to try and love me more and forgive me more and be kinder and be more supportive. So now they've kind of got you, right? So any kind of positive quality becomes a trap when you are 100% always that thing. When you're like, I always have to be like this, I can never be anything different, then it becomes a trap. But if you can say, 90% of the time I'm a loving, caring person, but 10% of the time I am gonna say no, I am gonna be distant, I am gonna be cold, I am gonna do all these things to keep some people away from me, that is actually healthy. That is actually something you want. You want to have that range of options. a range of behaviors that you can choose from depending on the situation, like what the situation calls for, as opposed to trying to prove to the world that you're always going to be nice and you're always going to be good and you're always going to be kind and you're always going to be supportive. Because if you're stuck on that, what you're really stuck on is having to kind of like establish your identity to other people. You're like, I have to prove to other people that I'm nice and kind and supportive and loving. And that is a recipe for disaster. You need to know inside who you are, and you're going to be able to be who you are most of the time, but there'll be times when you just have to kind of adjust and pull some other strategy out of the bag that you would rather not use, but it's what the situation calls for. Now, the thing is, making these adjustments is often hard, not because you don't get it intellectually. Like, yeah, you get it. You know, you've read the books, or if you haven't, you can go read the books and you can get a list of all the things that you need to kind of do a little differently. But what makes it hard is the emotional part. When you make changes like this to how you deal with people, even if it's just sometimes, it can bring up a lot of inner stuff, because there's a reason that you got stuck in being nice all the time mode. In a way, being nice all the time is also kind of a stress response. It's the tend and befriend response, especially women. We use this a lot. We're like, ooh, there's a dangerous situation. Let's have a barbecue and make friends and make everything okay. This is kind of our solution to a lot of scary stuff. And that is totally fine. But when that becomes your default and you're always doing that, chances are there's some fear lurking underneath, like, oh, I have to do this to be safe. If I don't do this, bad things are going to happen. And so then you're limiting your options, you're limiting your ability to like choose different strategies and different behaviors depending on the situation. And instead, you're always stuck in being the nice person. And that is a problem, right? And so that kind of being stuck in being the nice person, combined with being kind of naive about how the world works and how some people tick, that can be really heartbreaking and dangerous in that sense, because you keep getting hurt over and over and over and over and over and over and over. Now, if you hear this and you recognize yourself in this, you're like, oh yes, this explains why I get stuck and why I keep kind of going around these cycles. Chances are there is a big theme of dealing with narcissists in your life, and that has really influenced how you've developed, let's say, your coping strategies and how you've kind of allowed yourself to be over time. Because, narcissists are very, very powerful, but they're also very stubborn. And so they force the people around them to kind of adjust and, bend over backwards, and because they won't budge, right? And so if you grew up with that, you will have learned to be flexible and kind and supportive and all these things, but it's not 100% who you are. There is another side of you that wants to stand up and say no and be a little confrontational from time to time, but she's been squashed and she's been held down out of fear that you're going to get into trouble. Now, there's ways to work through this. There's ways to neutralize the drama and the conflict and the stress around this, because all of this there's a coding inside of your body around, hey, this is what you learned, this is what worked at the time, and it becomes automatic, but it's also possible to remove that coding and just kind of give yourself a fresh start. If you're interested in that, that's something I teach my clients in No to Narcissists, No to Narcissists for Highly Sensitive People. It's a 6-month program where we work on like how narcissism has kind of shaped, your responses, being, dealing with narcissistic people, how it's shaped you and how it's held you back, and how to undo the ways that you're keeping yourself small, keeping yourself down, being nice all the time, afraid to stand up for yourself, like whatever it is. I'm not saying it's all of these things, right? Because now it sounds kind of sad, but a lot of people who are dealing with narcissists are actually very competent, strong people, but there will be some ways in which you realize you're being accommodating out of fear or habit, or you're not sure why, but somehow you just always like end up getting along with these people and finding out too late who they really are. Or there's some other way where there's some kind of cycle, there's some kind of pattern that keeps repeating itself with them, and you can't seem to break the loop. This program is about breaking the loop, and the specific loop is different for everyone, right? Like everyone's got their personal story, but there's certain techniques and practices that really help you identify what the loop is for you and then how to break it. So if you're interested in that, like take a look at No to Narcissist. The link is below. Summarizing everything, It is very possible to live a healthy life with a big open heart. You just have to know once in a while, you got to protect it. You got to close it around certain people. You got to use some different strategies. And when you can do that, then you can be kind and loving and be the person you want to be most of the time. That's really great, isn't it? All right. I hope this was helpful. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.